Well, it's not entirely ancient and forgotten because if you go to a Jewish funeral or a Jewish wake, they put the bed sheets over the mirror because they're afraid Lilith will come through and snatch the soul from the wake, aren't they?
You're absolutely right. And that's a very interesting detail that shows how some ancient beliefs about Lilith have persisted into modern Jewish customs and superstitions. The idea of Lilith as a figure who can snatch souls, particularly during vulnerable moments like a funeral or wake, speaks to the deep rooted fear and respect surrounding her mythos. The Jewish funeral and Lilith. In Jewish folklore, Lilith is often associated with death, childbirth, and the night. She is sometimes believed to harm newborns or pregnant women, but her influence is also thought to extend to death rituals. The belief that Lilith might come through a mirror during a wake or funeral has its roots in the idea that mirrors are portals to another world or dimension, an entryway to the unseen or the supernatural. Why the mirror? Mirrors in many cultures, not just in Jewish tradition, have been seen as gateways to other realms, often believed to reflect the soul or even capture it. During a funeral or wake, the soul of the deceased is thought to be especially vulnerable, and the mirror is seen as a potential opening through which Lilith could reach in order to snatch the soul. Covering the mirrors is a protective measure, ensuring that the soul of the deceased doesn't fall prey to supernatural forces. This practice isn't as widely followed today as it might have been in earlier generations, but it's still observed in some Jewish communities, particularly among those who adhere closely to traditional or mystical beliefs. The notion of Lilith's presence at the time of death reflects her role in folklore as a dangerous predatory figure who preys upon the vulnerable. The persistence of folklore. What's fascinating about this is that these ancient stories and beliefs continue to shape modern practices, even though the original mythologies may not be at the forefront of religious practice today. Just like other folklore figures, Lilith's power and influence transcend the written texts and take on a cultural and psychological role in the lives of many people. These practices and fears may also be seen as a way of coping with death, acknowledging the vulnerability and unknowns that come with it, and taking steps, even if symbolic, to protect the soul of the deceased from harm. It's interesting how these stories, rooted in myth, mysticism, and superstition, still influence customs and practices in contemporary Jewish culture. The fear of Lilith is still very much alive in these practices, showing just how powerful folklore can be in shaping real-world behavior and beliefs. If you want to explore more of these kinds of superstitions, beliefs, or even how folklore evolves over time, I'd be happy to dive deeper.
Well, I am curious about where Lilith would be in the Bible as far as Genesis goes, with her being Adam's first wife. You didn't hear me, did you?
Ah, you're referring to the fascinating and often debated story of Lilith as Adam's first wife, which isn't explicitly found in the Bible itself, but comes from later Jewish traditions, particularly in medieval Kabbalistic texts and the Talmud. This narrative has roots in the interpretation of certain biblical texts, but the story of Lilith as Adam's first wife is not directly stated in Genesis or any canonical books of the Bible. Where Lilith fits in the biblical context. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. In the book of Genesis, there are two different creation accounts. The first is in Genesis 1:27, open quote. So God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Close quote. This account doesn't specify the names or roles of the first human beings in detail, but simply says that God created both male and female simultaneously, in his image. Then, Genesis 2 provides a more detailed creation story, which some interpret as the creation of Adam and Eve. Genesis 2:21-22 states, open quote, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. Close quote. This is the story of Eve's creation, who is created from Adam's rib. In this narrative, Adam and Eve are presented as the first human couple, with Eve being created from Adam to be his companion. Lilith as Adam's first wife. The story of Lilith as Adam's first wife is found not in the Bible itself, but in Jewish mystical traditions, primarily in the alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval text from around the 9th to 10th centuries, the Talmud, and later Kabbalistic writings. According to these traditions, Lilith was created alongside Adam in Genesis 1 as his equal, rather than being created from Adam's rib in Genesis 2. The alphabet of Ben Sira recounts that Lilith was created at the same time as Adam, from the same earth, and was his equal. However, Lilith refused to submit to Adam's authority, and they quarreled. Lilith eventually left the Garden of Eden, choosing to fly away and live independently. According to the myth, she then became a demoness, associated with night and childbirth, and often depicted as a figure of seduction and danger. In this interpretation, Lilith is seen as rebellious, refusing to be subordinate to Adam, and this defiance leads to her expulsion. This story is quite different from the biblical narrative of Eve, who is created from Adam's rib, and who, in Genesis 3, shares in the fall with Adam by eating the forbidden fruit. Why the Lilith story isn't in the Bible. The story of Lilith is considered apocryphal, meaning it is not part of the canonical scriptures, but has roots in Jewish folklore, mysticism, and interpretations that developed outside the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. Lilith's tale emerged in a time when midrash, biblical exegesis, and other interpretative texts were common, offering more expansive, non-canonical accounts of biblical figures. The omission of Lilith from the biblical canon likely reflects the fact that early Jewish and Christian traditions didn't accept her mythos as part of the sacred narrative. Instead, the story of Eve, who is portrayed as the mother of all living, became the central focus. Lilith's evolving role in folklore and religion. Over time, Lilith's character evolved from a rebellious figure in Jewish mysticism to one of seduction and danger in medieval folklore. She became associated with the night, demons, and was even believed to be a threat to infants and mothers. In some traditions, she was viewed as a kind of counterbalance to Eve, representing an alternative, rebellious aspect of femininity. In contrast, Eve in the Genesis narrative represents the archetype of the submissive, obedient wife, created from Adam's rib, and ultimately the one who shares the responsibility for humanity's fall from grace. The significance of Lilith's absence from Genesis. The absence of Lilith from the Genesis narrative, and the focus on Eve instead, aligns with traditional views on gender roles in ancient times, where women were often portrayed as subordinate to men. Lilith's story, which implies independence and defiance, may have been seen as disruptive to these societal norms, hence why it wasn't included in the canonical scriptures. Theological and cultural reflections. While the Bible doesn't mention Lilith as Adam's first wife, the story of her rebellion and subsequent transformation into a demoness has been used in various ways throughout history. In modern feminist interpretations, Lilith has been reclaimed as a symbol of female independence and empowerment, standing in stark contrast.
There it goes again.